In this example, I want to go ahead and introduce the concept of JavaScript into a web page. So in the past, we've always talked about web pages with three parts. The first part being HTML, and that's what this class is really focused on. Additionally, your HTML might include images to make the site look nice. So we could use image tags, we can use image backgrounds, we can float text around images. So images is another part of a website. CSS is another part that we've discussed. So if we're going to style our HTML, we're going to use CSS to do that. And now finally we're getting to the fourth thing that would run inside of a client's browser, and that's JavaScript. So this demo is really going to introduce you to how JavaScript fits into an HTML page. So I'm going to start by starting with an HTML page. So I'm changing this file from plain text to HTML. And then I'm going to use the HTML template. And I'm going to title this JavaScript Basics. Okay, so this page is going to be called JavaScript Basics. I'm going to save it on my desktop. I have a folder already set up on my desktop called JavaScript and Web Pages, and I'm going to save this file as index.html. And I'm going to give myself a little more screen real estate there. And in order to use JavaScript, and I guess before I get into this, I want to make sure that I have the right project folder. So I'm going to remove the current project folder, which is just the HTML web pages. I'm going to add the project folder that includes all of the JavaScript so that I can get the subdirectories. When we're working with JavaScript, we can have JavaScript that just automatically executes. So we might have like an initialization script where JavaScript would execute, but a lot of times there's an event that occurs that would trigger this JavaScript to execute. So in this example, what I want to do is I want to trigger the JavaScript code as a result of a button click. So I'm going to have a button on the page. So I'm going to have button type equal to button, and then I'm going to have a new attribute here, which is an onClick attribute. So when the user clicks on this button, something should happen. And what I want to happen is I want my JavaScript to execute. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this event that should occur. So the user clicks on the button. It's going to trigger a JavaScript function. So we're going to give it a function name right here. So we're just going to call this do something, so that something happens. And then the button text is going to be do something as well. Okay, so I'm going to have an event handler called do something that's going to execute when the user clicks on the button. So I'm going to go ahead and start up my Atom Live server. Okay, and we're going to go into our web pages, and here's our button. And right now nothing happens. So when I click on that do something, nothing's going to happen. In fact, if I bring up my developer tools, so I just right-clicked on the button and then there's an inspect. It's going to bring up my developer tools. And in the console, you'll notice that do something is not defined. I'm getting an error on line 8. So it's complaining about the fact that do something doesn't exist. If I clear this and I click on it, you'll see that error comes up. Do something is not defined. Okay, so I'm seeing that there's a problem, and the problem happens to be in this case that I said that when the user clicks on the button, we should do something, but there's no JavaScript function called do something at this point. So let's go ahead and add that JavaScript function called do something. Okay, so the way I'm going to handle that is I could have script tags up here in the head section and include my JavaScript. Instead, what I want to do is I want to have an external JavaScript file. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to have this script source. So I have a script tag with a source attribute being where that JavaScript file is going to reside relative to this web page. So relative to this web page, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a new subdirectory. So I'm going to create a new folder called JS for JavaScript. And then I'm going to have a new file called index.js. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to indicate that where my JavaScript resides is going to be in this index.js file. So relative to my web page, I'm going to have to move up a directory that puts me in the JavaScript folder. Then I'm going to have to go into the JS folder, JS for JavaScript, and then I'm looking for index.js. That's where it's going to find the file. Okay, so now that file already exists, but I need a function called doSomething. So I'm going to have a function called doSomething, and something should happen with this function. Okay, so even if nothing happens with the function definition, so I just have the name of the function defined, even if I don't write JavaScript code there, that's going to fix that error. So now you'll notice that when I click on the button, no errors come up, because it's executing that function even though that function's not actually doing anything. Okay, so I can make that function do something. So the most visually interesting thing I can do with the function right now is I might pop up alert saying hello world. Okay, so when I click on the button now, so I'm clicking on the do something, you'll notice that alert comes up and it says hello world. It says whatever that message is that I passed in to that alert. Alternatively, alerts get really annoying as you're debugging, because now I have to respond to that pop-up window every time. Alternatively, I could maybe use some diagnostic information. I could log information to the console. Okay, and this is a little less invasive, because now you'll notice that when I click on the button, hello world shows up in my developer tools console. So it's not something that's going to bother the user. So I click on the button. As many times as I click on the button, that hello world message shows up in the console. Okay, so I'm able to wire that button click, so the on-click event, to some JavaScript function definition that's going to execute. Okay. Okay, so now we can kind of go a little further. What I want to do is I want to have a div tag on the HTML body or some kind of heading. So I guess it doesn't necessarily matter what HTML element I choose. I just want to have an element that has some text inside of it. Okay, so I'm going to choose an h2 tag, and my heading is working with JavaScript. Okay, so I have that h2 tag. It says working with JavaScript. What I want to do is I'm going to give this h2 tag an ID. So I'm going to call it my main heading. And the importance of this ID is it allows me to uniquely identify that h2 tag. And because I can uniquely identify that h2 tag, I can now work with that h2 tag over in my JavaScript. So what I can do is I can use document.getElementById, and then I can pass in the ID of the element that I want to work with. So the element that I want to work with is main heading. And what this is, so this document.getElementById passing in main heading, is it's a reference to that HTML element, that h2 element that's on the HTML page. So all the things that I could do with an h2 tag, for instance, I might add class definitions, I might set width, I might set an ID, I might have event handlers on that h2 tag. Anything that I could dream up of doing in HTML, I can now accomplish those same things in JavaScript. So for instance, I might want to change the text. Okay, so right now the text is working with JavaScript. I can say that the text should be working with JavaScript is cool. Okay, so now when I run this, so right now it's working with JavaScript, but when I click on this button, you'll notice that the case changes and I get some additional text there. I actually change the text. And every time I click on that button, that function runs and it changes the text to working with JavaScript is cool. So I can change the text of any HTML element is assuming that I can get a reference to the element. And the way I'd get a reference to the element is using this document.getElementById to reference an element. Another thing I could do is I could change attributes. Okay, so this is a little bit tougher to visually see, but let's say I wanted to use document.getElementById main heading, so I'm still talking about that h2 tag, and then I want to add a class, or I want to set an attribute like a style attribute. So maybe like .style.height is equal to 100. Okay, and this isn't actually going to do anything. That's not going to change the height or anything like that. But I just want to show you what that attribute looks like. So now if I come back over to the browser and I click on the button, you'll see working with JavaScript is cool. It didn't really change the height, but I want to make sure that that's working. So I should have a style attribute where the height is 100, and I didn't even specify units or anything like that. Well, if I do a view page source, you'll notice that I have some junk here because of the live server. So you'll see even it mentions code injected by the live server. That's this code right here. But then you'll see I have this button, I have my main heading, and still says working with JavaScript, even though that text is changed to working with JavaScript is cool. So when I do that view page source, what it's showing me is the initial page source that was sent to the client's browser based on the fact that it read the HTML off the file system, and this is what got sent out to the browser. Okay, well, JavaScript then executed. So I clicked on the button and some JavaScript executed, and it changed what's actually getting rendered in the browser. So it's not that initial page source. It's now been modified by JavaScript. So I need to see that modified version of the current HTML, and the only way I can do that is with the developer tools. So with the developer tools, I can see in real time what's going on with this HTML. So if I click on the elements, you can see now that the main heading is changed. And I'm not seeing the style, and that's interesting that I'm not seeing the style. I think I should be seeing the style. But you will notice that the text has changed. Okay, so here's the text being changed. I'm not sure why the style is not actually showing up. I'm guessing that it just doesn't show the style. So let's deal with something that will show up. Okay, so instead of style, so style is kind of a unique attribute, let's go ahead and set the name to be some name that was set from JavaScript. Okay, so we're setting the name. So when I click on this button, and I'm still not seeing the name attribute. Why am I not seeing the name attribute? And I do have an error. So let's take a look what the error is. And I don't think I should be running into an issue here. Let's try one alternative syntax. So maybe you know this, maybe you don't. I'm the JavaScript instructor at Madison College, so I'm surprised that this is not working. But let's go ahead and set the name attribute equal to some value. Set attribute name to some name that was set from JavaScript. And I just want to verify that it will come across. So dot notation should be working, but apparently it's not for names, and we're dealing with some unique attributes. I'm kind of dealing with a limited subset of attributes, but you'll notice now the name is set from JavaScript, and I can actually see that in the elements window in the developer tools. Okay, so now when I click on the button, I get a reference to this h2 tag, I change the text, and I change an attribute. of that h2 tag so that it has some value. Okay, and the way we're doing that is with the setAttribute method so that we can actually see it. Okay, so other places we can go with JavaScript. So initially JavaScript started out as a language that was built to validate HTML. And that's all people use JavaScript for. And nowadays you'll see that JavaScript is used all over the place for all sorts of different types of applications. It's really a robust programming language. But I want to show you what some of that validation looks like because that's what your exercise is focused on for this week. So let's assume that the user is going to enter maybe a zip code. Okay, so I'm going to have a label for the zip code, and then an input field for the zip code. So input type equal to text, name equal to zip, ID equal to zip, and then no value. And I'm going to put that into a container. So whether it's a section or a div tag or whatever you want to call it, I'm going to put it into its own container. So I'm putting it into a section. So there's my zip code. And then what I want to do is I want to have a button to validate that the zip code was in a particular format. I want to make sure that the user only entered numeric characters into that zip code field. So I'm going to have a button, type equal to button, and there's not a name, so I'm going to have an ID called validate button, and the text is going to show up as validate. So now you'll see what we have is we have the zip code label, the user's going to enter something, and then we're going to click on this validate button, and we should know whether this is a valid zip code or not. Okay, so if they enter 5 digits, that's fine. If they enter 5 digits and a dash and 4 more digits, that's fine. But there should be no non-numeric characters here, and we're stuck with the 5 followed by the 4 digits. Okay, so we have a specific format that we're looking for with that zip code. So we can do that with this button. So we have this validate button that's going to then check to see if this zip code that the user entered was actually valid. Okay, so I'm going to have an onClick, and it's going to trigger a method called validate zip. Okay, so we have this validate zip. I'm going to add that function. And the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out what the user actually typed into this zip code field. So I'm going to use a variable to get that value. So I'm going to have a variable, user entered zip code. And the way I'm going to get that is I'm going to use document.getElementById. We called that element zip. And I want to know what the user typed. I'm going to use the .value attribute to grab the user entered value. Okay, and we can verify that that's going to come across correctly. The way we're going to do that is we're just going to log the user entered zip code. Okay, so now we come back over here. I enter my zip code in Verona, and in the console, I'm going to log that zip code. So you'll notice that I'm able to retrieve that value from the text box. If I enter some non-numeric characters, that comes across as well. So the first example is a valid zip code. The second example is an invalid zip code. Okay, so when we started this up, I had Blackboard open, and this is in your assignments. So in the assignments, we're looking at the week 7a, JavaScript regular expressions, and the syntax is that we're going to define a pattern. And the pattern is going to define what a zip code looks like. So in our case, a zip code is going to be 5 digits, and that could be a valid zip code, or it could be 5 digits, a dash, followed by exactly 4 more digits, and that would also be a valid zip code. Okay, so what we know is that we can use this \d to say that there's a digit, and then I can use curly braces with a numeric value to tell me how many instances of a digit I should be looking for. So let's just focus on that first pattern, which is exactly 5 digits for a zip code. So this is kind of a simple example. Okay, so I know what the user entered zip code is. They have that. What I want to do is I want to take that user entered zip code and I want to test it against a particular pattern. And the particular pattern that I want is going to be based on regular expressions and regular expression rules. And if you go back over to Blackboard, here's some of the rules. Okay. And here's the answer to what we're looking for, but let's go ahead and write that out a little bit. So I have that user entered zip code and I want to test it against a particular pattern. And if I am really looking at this, I want a regular expression. So if I'm looking at this test, you can see how we're doing this. I'm taking a pattern and testing it against the text. So what I want to do is kind of the opposite of this, which is I know what the user entered zip code is, but first I have to define the pattern that I want. So the pattern that I want is always going to start and end with 2 forward slashes. So start with a forward slash, end with a forward slash, and then I can define the pattern. So the pattern that I want is \d, and I want exactly 5 of those. So there's my pattern, and I want to test if the user entered zip code matches that pattern. And I'm going to get a result here. So I'm just going to say, what is the result of this? And then we can log the result. Okay, so I go back over. I'm looking at my JavaScript basics. I refresh the page. I enter ADF. Obviously, that's not a valid zip code, and you'll see that I get false. If I enter a valid zip code, so 5 digits, then you'll notice that it tells me it's true. If I enter 6 digits, then it's true. If I enter more than 6 digits, so I don't even know how many I have there, it tells me it's true. So what's happening to me now is I'm saying, do I have a pattern that has 5 digits? And I do. Okay, so I want to be more specific about this. I want to say it's exactly 5 digits. It starts at the beginning. There's 5 digits, and then it ends with exactly 5 digits. Okay, so in order to do that, I have to add some additional qualifiers to my regular expression. So I'm going back over, and the qualifiers that I want to use is the caret is saying starting at the very beginning of my thing that I'm testing, so that user entered value. So starting at the beginning, I'm looking for exactly, in this case, 2 digits, but in our case, we're going to be looking for 5 digits. And then the pattern should end at that point, and the way I'd end a pattern is with a $sign. Okay, so I want to apply that to our example, so I'm going to start with exactly 5 digits, so I'm going to use the caret. And then I want it to end after exactly 5 digits. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that now. And now we can go back over to our test. We refresh the page. I enter some garbage, and obviously it's not valid. If I enter a valid zip code, that's fine. It tells me it's valid. If I go to a 6th character now, it should tell me it's invalid. And now, unless I have exactly 5 characters, and all 5 characters are digits, this expression is not going to match my pattern. Okay, so I'm doing pattern matching there, and I'm looking for exactly 5 digits. Okay, so that gets us through part of the zip code. The next part of the zip code is problematic, And I say it's problematic because it's really optional whether I include that 4, that dash, and then the 4 additional digits. Okay, so if I go back over to Blackboard, and I already told you we have the answer down below. So you'll see in parentheses, we have the dash, 4 additional digits, and then we want to make all of that optional, so we put the question mark after it to say, hey, this whole thing is optional. So the dash and the 4 digits is really an optional thing, but you can have it either way. You can either do the 5 digits, or optionally you can do the 5 digits, a hyphen, and 4 additional digits. But that's it. That's exactly the pattern. Okay, so we can add that in. So we're going to say, in parentheses, all the stuff in parentheses is optional. That's what this question mark is indicating. So what we're going to say is we want a dash. That's going to be part of the optional pattern. And then we want digits, and we want exactly 4 digits. Okay, so that's the pattern that we're looking for now. Okay, so if I go back over to my browser and I'm working with a zip code, so I pick 53593, that's valid. If I just enter a dash, that's not valid because I don't have the 4 additional characters, the 4 additional digits. If I add the 4 additional digits, now it's a valid zip code. If I enter a non-numeric character in those 4 digits, that's a problem. So really, I think we have the zip code problem worked out here. Okay, and there's all sorts of different character sets that you can use with regular expressions. So the example I gave was just numeric values. And numeric values are great, but there's a ton of information regarding regular expressions and patterns. One thing I usually like to do, especially when I'm writing them, it's almost easier to write them than it is to read them because they can get really complicated. But if I'm going to try to write a regular expression and define a pattern, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do a regular expression cheat sheet. And the cheat sheet will give me some kind of image that gives me all the rules of regular expressions. Okay, and this is the one that I usually like to use. Okay, so this kind of cheat sheet that gives you all the different expressions that you could use, how to start, how to end. So end of a string, start of a string. So we use these 2 anchors. We used character classes to indicate that it's a digit. We could have used an uppercase D to say that it's not a digit. We can use groups, so A through Q uppercase, digit 0 to 7. We could use digit 0 to 9. So instead of using the \D, we could use digits 0 through 9. That'd be fine as well. Okay, it's just an alternative method to write this regular expression. Okay, so we are going to be working with regular expressions to validate different patterns. In fact, if you look at modern HTML, we can define a pattern inside of our input fields. So we could be specific and say that this input field takes this particular pattern, and it would automatically apply that validation for us. Okay, so right now we're doing it with JavaScript because I want to introduce you to JavaScript and how you would include JavaScript and how you might work with some HTML elements. So that's the idea here, but just know that regular expressions are going to be used kind of throughout the process of building an HTML site.